Okay, let's just jump right in. Today, we're diving into an explainer that decodes the hidden mathematical rules governing literally everything, from your everyday decisions all the way up to global conflicts. We like to think our choices are entirely our own, right? Guided by our personal morals, maybe a gut feeling. But what if there's an actual rigid architecture underlying all human interaction? What if there's a literal math to the madness of competition, cooperation, and yeah, even betrayal? Well, that's exactly what we're looking at today with game theory.
So put yourself in the hot seat for just a second. Imagine you're locked in a dreary interrogation room, and they offer you a really sweet deal, maybe a decent cup of coffee, and hey, your freedom if you just turn on your partner. What would you do? Do you stay quiet, risk a much heavier sentence, and just pray your partner does the same? Or do you snitch to save your own skin? It's a visceral, deeply uncomfortable question for sure, but the way you answer it reveals the invisible forces that dictate human behavior.
To unpack all of this, here's our game plan. First, we'll cover the rules of the game. Second, the classic prisoner's dilemma. Third, the math behind betrayal. Fourth, game theory in real life. And finally, hacking the dilemma.
And by the way, all the insights we're unpacking today come directly from a really fascinating 2024 academic paper by Unias Dial at the Republic of Indonesia Defense University. This paper perfectly frames how game theory isn't just some dusty, abstract concept. No, it's an active, practical tool that individuals, massive corporations, and even entire nations use to make nearly impossible choices when the stakes are high and the outcomes are totally uncertain.
Okay, Section 1. The rules of the game. The origins of strategy.
Now, this incredibly powerful framework didn't just pop up overnight. It actually evolved over decades through the minds of some truly brilliant mathematicians. It all started back in 1928, when John von Neumann proved the formula for zero-sum games. Then, jump to 1944, von Neumann teamed up with Oscar Morgenstern to drop the foundational text, Theory of Games and Economic Behavior. Fast forward a bit to 1950, and John Nash, yes, the literal guy from A Beautiful Mind, generalized these results, laying the absolute bedrock for modern game theory as we know it. Today, this math isn't just for math nerds, it's practically a secret weapon used by economists, political scientists, and biologists all over the globe.
So here's the crucial thing to remember. Game theory absolutely is not about random luck, like winning the lottery. For a scenario to actually count as a game in this scientific sense, it has to hit three very specific criteria. First up, you need interacting players. That means your actions have a direct impact on someone else and vice versa. Second, you've got to have clear rules outlining exactly what you can and cannot do. And third, there have to be clear outcomes or rewards at the very end of the game.
And that brings us to the core, honestly kind of cynical assumption of this whole science. Game theory just assumes that all parties are entirely rational and acting purely in their own self-interest. It operates on the basic premise that everyone is playing to maximize their own piece of the pie, completely regardless of the fallout for anybody else. People will cooperate if it helps them, and they will absolutely lie when they need to.
Which leads us to Section 2, the classic prisoner's dilemma. Betrayal versus silence. This is the most famous model in all of game theory, originally cooked up in 1950 by mathematicians and later formalized into the story we know today. Here's exactly how it works. Step 1. Two prisoners are locked in isolation, zero communication. Step 2. They have to choose between cooperating with each other, meaning they both stay silent, or betraying their partner to the cops. And Step 3 introduces the wild twist. The rewards are rigged so that, paradoxically, mutual betrayal is rewarded much more heavily than mutual cooperation. If you both just stay silent, you both get a light sentence. But if you snitch and your partner stays quiet, you walk completely free and they take the maximum penalty. If you both snitch, you both get a medium penalty. It is a brilliant, vicious setup where pure selfish rationality actively destroys the best possible outcome for the group.
Moving on to Section 3, the math behind betrayal, decoding the logic. To understand why smart people constantly make the quote-unquote wrong choice here, we have to talk about your dominant strategy. In game theory, this is the action that yields the highest payoff for you absolutely regardless of what your opponent decides to do. It is your ultimate safety net. In the case of our locked-up prisoners, betrayal looks insanely attractive as a dominant strategy. Why? Because think about it. If your partner stays silent, betraying them gets you off scot-free. And if they betray you, betraying them right back protects you from the absolute worst-case scenario. The math literally says betrayal is your safest bet.
But because both players are acting rationally and looking at that exact same dominant strategy, it inevitably leads to a Nash equilibrium. This is essentially a state of absolute gridlock. It happens when players lock into a strategy and neither can benefit by changing their mind on their own. If one person suddenly decides to be the nice guy and stay silent while the other one is still betraying them, the nice guy gets completely crushed. So basically, nobody moves. And what this actually means in practice is completely fascinating. In a typical prisoner's dilemma, the Nash equilibrium is reached when both players betray each other. The math flat out guarantees it. Perfect individual mathematical logic actually leads to a massive collective failure. They both end up serving hard time, whereas, if they had just trusted each other and stayed silent, they would have been so much better off together. Let's zoom out a bit. Section 4, Game Theory in Real Life. Because this exact same two-player math maps perfectly onto the cutthroat world of business. Competing firms face a daily prisoner's dilemma. Now, they could cooperate, right? They can maintain higher prices to preserve greater collective profits for everybody. But the temptation to betray is literally always there. A company might secretly slash their prices just to steal some market share, which almost always triggers a devastating price war. That dominant strategy to steal customers ends up totally destroying profits for the whole industry.
And we see the exact same thing play out on the global stage with international diplomacy. When nations sit down to negotiate, they are so often paralyzed by this exact dilemma. In an ideal world, they would cooperate, agree to disarm, and foster a peaceful global environment. But, driven by fear and short-term national interests, they usually default to betrayal. They pump up their military arsenals because they just can't risk the other side having a weapon they don't. And that dominant strategy, it sparks a global arms race, cranking up tensions for the entire world. Sociologically, we see this all the time when people interact with public resources. Let's look at fisheries as an example. The cooperative choice is obviously sustainable fishing, ensuring there's plenty of fish for the community's long-term survival. But on an individual level, a single fisherman might realize, hey, I can make a lot more money right now if I overfish. When everyone makes that rational, selfish choice, when they all choose betrayal, it leads to what we call the tragedy of the commons. The resource gets completely wiped out, and ultimately the entire community suffers. And even in the digital age, this math is completely relentless. Take cybersecurity. Tech companies are facing a massive dilemma right now. A shared, collective commitment to really strong security practices protects the whole industry from massive threats. But man, the temptation is to save a few bucks by skipping out on those expensive individual security upgrades. When companies betray the collective by skimping on their own defenses, they end up leaving the entire network wide open to catastrophic hacks. As the 2024 paper from Unia's DAO firmly establishes, you have to constantly anticipate what the other party is going to do. Sometimes you know the possible moves, but very often you're forced to guess what the other party knows that you don't. That dynamic makes game theory not just an academic exercise, but a highly practical, necessary tool for survival in a complex world where our interactions can honestly seem super confusing at first glance. So how do we fix it? Section 5, Hacking the Dilemma, Forcing Cooperation. The research outlines that we can literally hack the dilemma by totally redesigning the incentives. If the math naturally leads us to betrayal, well, we just have to change the math. We can implement strict regulations and penalties for things like excessive resource use, essentially making the betrayal option way too expensive to even consider. We can create reward mechanisms that actually make cooperation the most profitable choice. We can also rely on repeated interactions, what researchers call the repeated prisoner's dilemma, so that players build historical trust, knowing they're going to have to face each other again tomorrow. And of course, introducing massive transparency in negotiations can basically eliminate that fear of the unknown. What all this shows us is that resolving these complex problems isn't just a math equation anymore. It demands a highly interdisciplinary approach. We actually need economists, sociologists, and policymakers to get in a room and work together. They have to design policies and structures that rewrite the rules of the game from the ground up, making sure that our rational, self-interested decisions are finally aligned with the greater good of society. Now that you know the hidden math governing human behavior, you actually have a distinct advantage. You can see the board, you know what the dominant strategies are, and you fully understand the trap of the Nash equilibrium. So, the real question is, when your next dilemma arrives, whether that's in a tense boardroom, in a personal relationship, or figuring out how to manage a community resource, how are you going to play the game? Will you blindly compete, or will you find a way to rewrite the rules and cooperate? Something to think about. Thanks for exploring this explainer with me today.